Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order. All electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during committee meetings. We have quorum present. And who are you pointing to, Councillor Crutch? Mike, is he here?
He's literally working.
There he is. Okay, quorum is present. Was before you got here, Mike, but welcome. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Madam Mayor, there's one change to the agenda. We have one delegation for under item 7, delegations from 7.1 from Dermot Nolan, representing the Hamilton Museum Citizens Committee, respecting Discovery Centre Strategy Framework for today's meeting. And although not a change to the agenda, an older version of report PED 21090D, respecting Discovery Centre Strategy Framework, preliminary option for Discovery Centre site. It's item 8.2 on the agenda. An older version of this report was originally published to the agenda and has been replaced with the correct version. The presentations for items 8.1 and 8.2 have been published to the agenda. And finally, another error on the agenda, items 7 and 9, delegations and consent items, were reversed in the order of the agenda, and that has also been corrected.
Okay, thanks very much. May I have the mover and seconder then to approve the agenda as identified? Moved by Councillor Crutch, seconded by Councillor Spadafora. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Are we going on the WebEx or?
It's an electronic vote.
Okay, on the e-scribe.
Yeah.
Oops.
If you'd like to indicate, I can.
I don't know why I can't. Okay.
And the results are on the screen.
That carries 3-0. Thanks very much. Let's see, now we're on to declarations of interest. Members of committee, are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none. Approval of minutes from the previous meeting, item 4.1, April 14th, 2023. May I have a mover and seconder to approve the minutes of the April 14th, 2023 meeting? Moved by Councillor Spadafora, seconded by Councillor Crutch. Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, we'll then go to the vote, which I'm going to try to get this time. I'm in favor of that, so then that carries, I believe, 3-0. Thanks so much. Delegations, item 7. Before we hear the delegate, members are reminded that questions of delegations are for clarification purposes only and not for debate. And so then I would invite Dermot Nolan, Hamilton Museum Citizens Committee, respecting Discovery Centre Strategy Framework, to join us at the end of the table. Nice to see you, Mr. Nolan. As you get comfortable, I just wanted to let you know that you have 5 minutes for your presentation, and then when you're completed your presentation, we will open it up to any questions or points of clarification that the members of committee might have. So we're ready when you are.
Thank
Welcome.
You. Thanks very much for fitting us in. We are circulating right now a written submission that summarizes basically what I have to say to you today. I hate to give you more to read because I understand, I'm amazed at how much you folks have to read. We made it short, it's just 2 pages. I do hope you'll take the time to read it because it will put the presentation that you're about to hear today from the staff and the library leaders in some context, and it will put in context the efforts that our committee has been making now for some 5 years to advocate for a central Hamilton Museum. That is something that We came together 5 years ago, approximately 60 citizens who got together and said, you know, it's a shame and an embarrassment that Hamilton is one of only 2 cities or even small municipalities in the province that doesn't have a central history museum. And when we think about what Hamilton has to say and the Hamilton story, it's astonishing that that gap hasn't been fulfilled in all the years that Hamilton has existed. The only other city in the same boat is, amazingly, Toronto. Now, we don't like to be like Toronto, so I know you understand that. And so we want to step out and make sure that Hamilton has a central place to celebrate the amazing history that we've got. And I suggest to you that if everyone around the table were to just start thinking of topics, just any subject you want, and start listing them, you know, politics, immigration, industry, sports, arts, just go down the list. It's unlimited. And if you picked one of those subjects and you said, what's Hamilton's story on that subject? You'd immediately know and understand what great stories Hamilton has to tell. And I don't have to tell you folks, you know Hamilton, you love Hamilton, we love Hamilton, and that's something that we've been really, really advocating for. And fortunately, City Council has unanimously over and over and over again endorsed our project and said, yes, we need to look into how we can have a central facility for showcasing Hamilton's story in a meaningful way, in an interactive way, in a dynamic and alive way. We call it a museum, but it's much more than a museum. It's a place to celebrate Hamilton so that people know where to go when they come here, when they move here. They know where to find out about what an amazing community this is and has been for 150 years and more, frankly, all the way back to the first people who inhabited this amazing harbor on the big lake. Now, here's the good news, and you're going to hear more about it from these folks over here later on in the meeting, and you've seen it in your materials. The good news is that the Hamilton Public Library has essentially been the repository of Hamilton's stories and history up until now. Not a museum, not its primary function, but a very important part of its function. And if you'll see as you go through this little summary that we've given you that back in November 2021, Council asked the staff of the city to work with our committee to explore opportunities to house a Hamilton Museum in a new or existing facility. That was the wording. That's the direction that the City Council gave back in 2021. And then when this committee was formed in February, or after it was formed in February 22, Council approved a framework for deciding what to do with the Discovery Center. And then in August of 2022, Council directed staff to work with the Hamilton Public Library, a natural partner, and with our committee and others to study opportunities for co-locating civic uses and providing heritage-based visitors experience at the site. So the library then, with tremendous vision and some money and some genuine commitment, has come up with the plan you're going to be asked to approve today as a preliminary option. And in that, one of the core components, 3 core components you'll hear about, is an exhibit and gallery space dedicated to showcasing and celebrating Hamilton's history.
Mr. Nolan, I hate to interrupt, but the clerk has advised me that your time
My
is
5
almost
minutes
up.
is
So,
up.
so just wrap it up.
I'll wrap
when
up.
you can.
So the point is that what you'll see is that one of the main components of what's being proposed in other words, is a kind of Hamilton museum. So what I'm saying to you on behalf of our committee is we're all in with this. We're delighted with the leadership of the library, and we are very excited to continue working with them and you to see that Hamilton's story really gets told. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Are there any questions of Mr. Nolan from the committee members? Councillor Crutch, please.
Thanks first for your presentation and delegation. I haven't had time to read this two-page sheet yet, but I will subsequently. So my only question to you really is, well, one thing I want to acknowledge first of all, that a lot of what we're talking about here is in finding ways to incorporate Indigenous history and making sure that's a focus of Indigenous storytelling, is a focus of the use of the space. My question for you is about the space itself. So this is a rather unique proposal in terms of the fact that there's an idea of having a library space. There's library programming involved, right? Some of that is artifact or physical material related, and some of that might look like a museum space like you're talking about. If you were spoiled for choice, right? I'm not saying you are. I'm saying this is one of the only options you've been presented in terms of fulfilling the goal you have of having a civic museum. But if you had a standalone civic museum, wouldn't you prefer, I'm asking if you'd prefer that instead of having this situation. What I'm asking you essentially is, I'm glad this came along. This came up as an option. You got involved in the discussion. My understanding originally from the discussions that this group had was you were looking for kind of a civic museum space that was dedicated to being a civic museum. Have I lost that, or could you talk about that a bit more?
That's how we started, all right? That's what the need was. I need to press the button here. That was our vision, and if you'll see in this material that, you know, when we established our committee, there was a mandate that we set for ourselves, and it's highlighted on the first page here. And we had we didn't want to get into a prolonged debate about where such a facility would be located, because that was a trap. I mean, every time you threw the idea out, somebody would say, well, we should do it here, we should do it there, we should. But we had some ideas, and one of the ideas was, in fact, the Discovery Center. I mean, it's such a fabulous location for showcasing Hamilton. I mean, if you want to come and really get excited about Hamilton, go down there and take a look around, you know? And it's central and all that, and it's on the waterfront, and the waterfront is so much of our history and our immigration stories and all that. So that's how we started, yes, and that's what we've been advocating for. When the library stepped up, and when this committee basically invited the library, or directed the city people to work with the library, we thought that was a natural fit. We thought that's perfect, because as I said, the library has sort of de facto been the, quote, museum, such as it is. I mean, anything to do with Hamilton's history, who's got it? Hamilton Public Library. Who's maintained it? Who's nourished it? So it's a perfect partnership. And frankly, your question is an interesting one. If you said to us, would you like to have the Discovery Center for only a museum, a City of Hamilton museum, or would you rather have it as imagined in the library's plan? Well, I think we'd be hard pressed to say that we want the former, and that's quite an admission, in that this concept adds a whole other dimensions that we hadn't even thought of, including a dedicated Indigenous meeting space. Our story, Hamilton's story, starts with our Indigenous forebears, if that's the right word, the people who were first here. That's where the history of Hamilton starts. And to say we're going to incorporate that with not only the story of our Indigenous peoples and the people that came later, but actually a meeting place for them to curate, in effect, their story told by them, and a place for them to meet. And it's a preliminary concept right now, but also an actual library branch to bring people in that location. It's kind of like, really? It's like, for us, it's like, that's a vision dropped from on high. So yes, I mean, our support for what these folks have put together is unqualified.
Thanks, Councillor Crutch.
Thanks, that answers my question, I appreciate it.
Any further questions? No? Okay, thanks so much, Mr. Nolan, for your presentation. Very
you.
much appreciated.
Thanks for hearing us.
Can I get a mover and seconder to receive the delegation? Moved by Councillor Crutch, seconded by Councillor Spatafora. Could we just have that vote up, please? That's great. That carries 3-0. Thanks so much. Thank you again. Very much appreciate your words.
Thank you.
And we'll now move on with the agenda. We're on to item 8, staff presentations. Indigenous Focus Macassa Bay Public Space Design Process, PED 23-123, Ward 2, 8.1. So I'd like to call upon Chris Phillips, Manager, Municipal Land Development Office, to provide the presentation.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just want me to go ahead? So thank you for the opportunity. We've got two reports on today's agenda. The first one that I'm speaking to on Macassa Bay, and the second that my colleague Andrea Smith will speak to. I do want to kind of say at the very beginning that from a staff perspective, we're pretty proud of both these reports, and we're also pretty proud of the fact that we think that they're pretty innovative. What I mean by that is the fact that over the course of time, and you'll see that in a couple of slides here, we've been doing a lot down at the Harbour front and a lot of at the West Harbour that really sticks to many of the plans that have been in place. But what we were kind of challenged with in these two scenarios was looking and reevaluating, both monitoring what we've done, monitoring what we've been hearing from the community, and reevaluating. And I think the two reports to you today are kind of in the age after the pandemic, the idea of pivoting, of reevaluating, and kind of trying to find the things that we think kind of not only make sense to move forward, but in some respects just kind of feel right. This first report is really about Macassa Bay. And I'm going to kind of take you through a couple slides, to kind of make sure that we understand where is Macassa Bay, what's in the plans that we've had before us, and why are we looking to do something different here. But I think to start it, this idea here on the slide that is really embodies what this report is all about. As we started really looking at this whole area of Macassa Bay, we started to reevaluate and hear what people were saying and what different communities and what different elements of the leadership were saying. And we kind of came up with these two aspects to really kind of take a look and a focus in. That one, there's a wide-ranging community interest in kind of some of these new purpose-built, purpose-designed public spaces. We've got a lot of programming type spaces in the Piers 6, 7, and 8 area, but where are the areas for a little bit more passive open space and green space and naturalization? And the second is that there's obviously led by our two leaders in the city, Shelley Hill and Jennifer DiDomenico, there's definitely a focus internally at the city on an acknowledgement to acknowledge the rich history and the culture in the area's Indigenous communities, and trying to figure out a way to have our waterfront represent this in a really meaningful way. And so as we kind of move to the recommendations in the report, you'll see that those two elements are really the basis for why we're here. I'm going to go through a couple slides that you've seen in previous presentations, just make sure that we're focused on the area and where we're talking about in Macassa Bay. West Harbour goes all the way from Princess Point and the Barton Tiffany lands all the way over to the Haida in Eastwood Park. And we're zeroing in on the Macassa Bay lands, which is give or take the areas from west of Pier 4 Park to the front of Bayfront Park. Historically, these lands are actually a fairly significant, underutilized, bit disregarded asphalt and gravel area that's between these two areas. And we're looking to convert these into new park, open space, and renaturalized shoreline with continuous public access to the water's edge. You also saw this slide in our last meeting together as well, kind of showing the evolution policy-wise as to how we got to where we got to in the whole aspects of the West Harbour and the West Harbour redevelopment plan. The Hamilton Harbour Remedial Action Plan moved to the Setting Sail Secondary Plan, which then moved to kind of a key focus of this presentation, the West Harbour Waterfront Recreation Master Plan. The idea of that plan was to set the stage for what would happen from a purely recreational park space and redevelopment between the area and the West Harbour. And finally, we get to the redevelopment plan, which is the plan that we're all working on, that council has supported, council has funded, and staff are executing and implementing as we go. Do you want to take just a couple seconds to highlight the West Harbour Recreation Master Plan? Approved in 2010, and actually a key piece and focus of the Setting Sail Secondary Plan was to do a recreation master plan that really looked at all the areas and kind of said, how will these areas evolve or redevelop over time? Most importantly in this area as well is to remember that many of the assets, namely Bayfront Park and Pier 4 Park, were built even prior to the adoption of the Rec Master Plan in 2010. The overall themes that you see up there on the slide, public access to the water's edge, very critical, multiple waterfront trails throughout the entire site, vibrant, active public spaces, and of course this idea of coherence, consistency in place throughout the entire plan, trying to make sure that we weave in the idea that it's one waterfront. Particular focus, though, the Rec Master Plan actually identified in each geographic area different things and elements that would kind of happen. In Macassa Bay, these were the four kind of high-level kind of thought processes that went into the master plan. Having the Macassa Bay Yacht Club access and trail consolidation on the water's edge of their property. Ensuring that the water's edge is fully open to the public. The police marine unit was slated to be relocated here as well. And the last piece of this idea of heritage interpretation was always mentioned in the Rec Master Plan for this particular area. And there's a couple kind of interesting parts of note on that. As we started to really look and monitor and reevaluate the plan just prior to the pandemic in 2019, staff actually retained Project for Public Spaces out of New York City to look at the entire waterfront West Harbour area and to kind of say, to look at the plan and kind of figure out the ideas of how could we activate the area and how could we do light touch activations instead of large-scale redevelopment, keeping in mind that the areas of Piers 6, 7, and 8 have significant redevelopment aspects to them, including significant development, namely on Pier 8 with the residential commercial development. They kind of came and they kind of said a couple kind of key things from their vantage point. The first was, don't forget that the overall West Harbour, it should have consistency and kind of the idea that we weave together this entire continuous area. The second piece that they kind of said is the idea of kind of look at some of the themes. One of the key things they didn't want us to do and kind of ensured that we looked at was don't change some of the things that people love about the waterfront today. Some of those things are keep it local, welcoming, low-key. There's areas that you can go that you can just hang out, just have a coffee. Yes, we're making big moves, but some of the small moves are really good as well. Retain the affordable, inclusive nature of the characteristics, where you don't have to buy something. You don't have to have an admission. You don't have to have a price to entry. Strike the balance between the new and current uses and the uses that we're kind of looking to build. And lastly, build on this legacy of environmentally and sustainable, resilient manner on the entire waterfront. And then obviously you can see underneath some of the ideas that they had kind of come up with that this Macassa Bay area could kind of be as well. Also in 2019 is the fact that the city approved the Hamilton Urban Indigenous Strategy. Key document, key foundational policy document that comes in to the city in 2019. And from a West Harbour perspective, we really start to look at that document and look at the leadership within the organization, and Shelley and Jennifer, and kind of say, how do we look and monitor and adapt to this strategy for the waterfront? And as staff kind of looked through the strategy, we kind of focused on these particular actions that are identified within the strategy to say, you know what, West Harbour is a kind of pretty interesting area that we could focus on here to achieve some of the actions that are in the strategy. As far as where we are today, the reality is that in previous capital budgets over the last few years, council's actually supported the next evolution of the waterfront plan for Macassa Bay to the tune of the figures you see on the screen, 4.1 million and 4.35 million. Staff were on our work plan for 2023 was the fact that we would kind of look at this area, start to go through a traditional process to say, okay, you start to design the area, and then you go to construction of it. And these are some of the key kind of points that are kind of already in the plan. The idea of having pedestrianized parkland, naturalized rehabilitated shoreline, public accessible boardwalk, those kind of items that are there. But as we started to kind of really kind of zone in on this idea of how do we weave in the key principles and thoughts and mandates kind of within the urban indigenous strategy, we kind of really thought maybe it's time on the Macassa Bay area to take a little bit of pause. Maybe it's time, instead of just rushing into a traditional design build process, that we kind of look at reevaluating things. And these items really came to mind. The Macassa Bay offers an opportunity to redevelop a program and design features with minimal predetermined and corresponding conditions. Other than public access to the water's edge, other than naturalization of the shoreline, and other than retaining the Macassa Bay Yacht Club, the area itself is really a bit of a blank canvas that we could kind of, so we're not kind of breaking any plans that have already been set in stone in order to kind of move. That we also think that there's a general vision for Macassa Bay area that aligns very well with the city's urban indigenous strategy. That there is a staff commitment around this table and many of our other colleagues that have been part of this consultation, that there's a commitment, a willingness, and a determination for us to plan, develop an indigenous-focused process that includes leadership and engagement from the indigenous community themselves throughout the entire process, right from the design stage all the way through to the execution of construction and even programming at the very end. And lastly, I think one of the things that we're pretty proud of from staff is that we really think that this can be a process that can illustrate the city's commitment to implementing elements of the urban indigenous strategy. So that being said, the recommendations that are before you today really start to lay out a process. I will say right from the outset that this is the beginning of a process with these recommendations. It is not the end of a process. We don't exactly know what it is that we're going to get, but this report before you today is really to get your approval on this direction and kind of move from there. So we're looking for you to approve the idea that we develop and initiate an indigenous-focused conceptual design process, that the process should advance the actions of the city's urban indigenous strategy, and specifically in the strategic themes of land, spirit, and people. That the key principles outlined in the West Harbour Rec Master Plan, those kind of high-level principles still remain intact and continue to be used as guide the overall design. And that lastly, as part of this process, as we start to really dig into it and do the heavy work of what the process would be, that staff identify next steps and any approvals required for the execution and implementation, and bring those things back to this committee for you to approve as we go through the process. With that said, I will take questions.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Chris. Can I ask if there are any questions of the presenter? Councillor Kretsch.
Everything's in Ward 2, so I got something to say. Sorry, I'm just kidding, but it's also true. The question I had specifically was about the last point you had on your list there, which were that, next steps and any approvals required would come back here. So if there were approvals that weren't required, they obviously wouldn't come back here. So I was looking for the leadership component in this, because I know that the report was co-authored by yourself and Shelley. And so who will be leading this work? Because that's not really clear to me. When it says staff in there, if this is going to be staff, this is going to be, the outcome is going to be about ensuring we meet the values associated with the urban indigenous strategy. I'm assuming the folks in the urban indigenous strategy on that office will be leading this work. So could you just define that or speak to that more clearly?
Sure. Through you, Madam Mayor. So from a leadership perspective at the moment, it'll actually be our office. But we've been doing that actually in consultation with the Indigenous Relations Office, sorry, Shelley. One of the aspects that actually Shelley and Jen have said is that they would like to rely on us, namely due to the capacity that they have within their office, and we've certainly been willing to accept that. As it relates to how we actually, what it looks like, we're not sure about that yet, and that is part of the work that we're looking to do as we kind of go through this, and exactly what form the community consultation kind of takes, and in particular the Indigenous community consultation. Shelley and Jennifer and her team, we're looking for them to provide leadership on that, although we may provide some of the heavy lifting as far as the actual capacity of doing things. Last but not least, I do want to touch on the piece that you did say about bringing back things for approval. Those are things that we see potentially as things that would require approval from the subcommittee and from council eventually, because perhaps they're out of the norm. I'm going to use an example of procurement. Perhaps this process actually needs a different procurement process about how we actually go and design or do these types of contracts. And if we do identify that, that would be a key element that we'd likely bring those things back and say, okay, in order for us to have this Indigenous-focused plan and Indigenous-focused kind of strategy, we think that maybe we need some very specific kind of actions from council in order to do that. So that'd be an aspect of one of the items that we may bring back.
Councillor Gretsch?
Thanks. That's really helpful context, knowing that there's been an ask for some co-leadership here. And just want to continue to see, no matter what the approvals are, what the process looks like, just want to make sure that we continue to center Indigenous folks in the conversation and they keep coming back to these conversations. Because I know that there have been lots of conversations about, that don't necessarily always involve folks. I'm glad to see that co-leadership here and that folks are here today. So just want to keep that spirit alive. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions of the presenter? Can I have you take the chair, Councillor Spadafora?
Go ahead, Mayor.
Thanks very much. So my question is, and thank you very much for the presentation, Manager Phillips, it was excellent. My question is just around the first recommendation on that last slide that says that staff be directed to develop and initiate. So when we're talking staff, we're talking staff of your division plus staff of the Indigenous office, right? So it's a collective as opposed to one or the other.
Through you, Vice Chair, yes, completely collectively together, and including staff from all sorts of different areas. I'll use parks as an example, which would ultimately probably maintain this area when it's all said and done.
No, I appreciate that. I just, I sometimes worry about the process being such that although we talk about it being Indigenous focused, it really can't be unless it's Indigenous led. So staff being directed to develop and initiate that an Indigenous focused conceptual design process. I would have preferred language that was really clear around staff being directed to work with Indigenous communities to develop an Indigenous-focused process. But if we're all clear that that's where we're headed, that this in fact does, by indicating the commitment to working with Shelley's group and the team, that the actual the development of the process is in fact collaborative, then I'm okay with that. So thank you for clarifying.
Let me take the chair back, Mayor.
Yeah, thanks very much. So on that note then, if seeing no further questions, can I have a mover and seconder to receive the, receive the presentation? Moved by Councillor Spatafora, seconded by Councillor Crutch. Can we just have a vote on that, please? That carries 3-0. Thanks very much, Manager Phillips. So now we have the report before us. Are there any, can I have a mover and seconder to put the report on the floor? Moved by Councillor Crutch, second by Councillor Spatafora.
No questions?
Oh, I thought we put the report on the floor first.
Yep,
Okay.
so we don't vote on it.
Oh, until it's after, okay. So then, no discussion? Any questions? No? Okay, great. Can we then have the vote on the report, please? Great, that carries 3-0. Thanks so much. We're now on to item 8.2, Discovery Center Strategic Framework, Preliminary Option for Discovery Center Site, PED 21090D, Ward 2. I'd like to call on Andrea Smith, Senior Development Consultant, West Harbour Redevelopment, to give the presentation, please.
Good afternoon. I'm pleased to be here to present an overview about the staff report about the Discovery Centre. The report brings forward recommendations for a preliminary option for the future use of the building, an option that identifies the Hamilton Public Library as the city's partner in developing a proposed concept for the building and describes the preliminary option as redesigning the facility to incorporate a library services area, Indigenous community gathering space, exhibits and gallery space, cafe and visitor amenities. Joined here today by Paul Takala, CEO and Chief Librarian of the Hamilton Public Library, who will share the library's vision and path ahead to move the preliminary option presented here today towards the proposed concept for a future council decision. Before turning over to Paul, I'll provide an overview for some site and process context, describe how the preliminary option was formed, what is the proposed work plan ahead to test and refine this option before bringing it back. So first, in terms of site context, the Discovery Centre building is located on prime waterfront lands located at the northwest portion of Pier 8. Initially, the building was built and operated as the Parks Canada Marine Discovery Centre. And then when the Marine Centre closed, it functioned for a time as a restaurant and informal event and meeting facility. Despite the desirability of this building and its location, it has been underutilized as a result of several factors, including the closure of the museum, changes in property ownership from federal to municipal government, and constraints of the applicable zoning bylaw regulations in attracting new uses. The building has remained mostly vacant with exception of Parks Canada offices still occupying an eastern portion of the building, occasional bookings of meeting rooms, and/or city-initiated animation programs such as Pop-Up on Pier 8 program running the last few years and then anticipated again this summer. So this slide here illustrates the general layout within the building. So number one is the Parks Canada office, which of course has ties to the origins of the building, being the Parks Canada owned and operated building previously. 2 is the restroom area. 3 is multi-use and storage room. 4, lobby and hallway. 5 is the theater. 6 is the Waterfront Shores leased area for the Pier 8 redevelopment sales center area. 7 is a small patio, and 8 is the large patio. So areas 1 and 6 have leasehold interests associated with them, but the other areas are common use areas or are available for community and/or private bookings. So a little bit about the process. I'll just take a moment to explain really what the process that led us to the staff report, where we are in the decision-making framework, and what we've done so far. In February 2022, Council approved the Discovery Centre framework, a framework that sets out the decision process that's made up of these two phases and 4 steps that move us towards establishing a future vision for the site. So phase 1 is strategy development, followed by phase 2, strategy implementation. So where we are, you can see at the top there's the black arrow showing that we are now proposing to conclude the opportunity study step, and are ready to commence work with confirming the vision, which is step 3. So in terms of what we did, the scope of the opportunity study was really made up of a number of different components and resulted in several different findings. So first, we did a property circulation process. So corporate real estate initiated this circulation to scan for municipal interests and to collect comments related to all information and or limitations relevant to the site. The process, it was really through this process that connected us with the Hamilton Public Library, who came forward expressing interest in this opportunity. The Hamilton Public Library provided a vision statement and is contained in the staff report, Appendix C, and of course Paul Takala is here today, who will expand in a moment on that vision. Building on the library's interests, the city's Heritage Resource Management section saw potential for service alignment with those of the library as part of supporting the library in delivering historical and cultural heritage programming. And then second, we did internal consultation. We consulted with a broad range of stakeholders from staff, including staff from the Indigenous Relations Office, Heritage Resource Management, Facilities, Corporate Real Estate, Recreation Services, and others, as well as external stakeholders. The goal here was to explore what people's thoughts were on opportunities for the site, but also what were some of the strategic considerations when we make decisions about this site. And it was also through this piece of work that the Indigenous Relations Office identified the opportunity to advance the relevant actions of the 2019 Urban Indigenous Strategy. And then we also consulted with the Indigenous Advisory Committee on 2 occasions, in part to inform them of this project in itself. We provided some updates. We sought some guidance regarding the approaches to Indigenous community engagement and to seek feedback on the opportunity that emerged with the library. The Indigenous Advisory Committee indicated full support of the library's vision presented, noting that it is a project worth pursuing to advance the education and understanding of Indigenous peoples. Further, the committee commented that the HPL vision supports many of the actions and deliverables within the Urban Indigenous Strategy as it relates to the land, spirit, and people-themed actions. And then we also did a community survey. So through the Engage Hamilton platform, we consulted the public through a variety, through a number of different tactics, but primarily the survey, to inform the community about the study and to gain an understanding of people's perspectives about the site. So taking all that information together helped us inform this preliminary option. We received over 1,400 survey responses, and one of the findings was that there was a strong majority from respondents that felt that a high degree of public use throughout the day, throughout the year, and to ensure public accessibility to the site are really important factors in making a decision about this site. Respondents also felt that amenities or features such as open space, restaurant, gallery, museum, meeting and event spaces, shops, and the library would serve as a draw in visiting the site. Fifth, we hosted a Heritage Roundtable in collaboration with the library to consult with several cultural heritage subject matter experts from local institutions and organizations such as the Art Gallery of Hamilton, Parks Canada, Woodland Cultural Centre, McMaster Library, RBG, and the Hamilton Museum Citizens Committee also participated in this event. We asked for feedback from the group on the library's vision and to identify strategic considerations in delivering cultural heritage-based visitor experiences and co-location of civic uses. A few of the highlights of the feedback included support from the group surrounding HPL's vision. They saw this as an opportunity to share Hamilton's diverse stories through a combination of innovative approaches, saw opportunity for community partnerships, and also saw opportunities for revenue generation through the attraction of groups, tours, event rentals, and business partnerships. We also reviewed council-adopted strategic plans for opportunities to advance goals within them. And so upon that review, we feel that the preliminary option aligns and advances objectives within the Urban Indigenous Strategy, the Civic Museum Strategy, the Economic Development Action Plan, and the West Harbour Secondary Plan setting sail. And finally, we conducted a commercial assessment for the Discovery Centre. In August 2022, Council directed staff to conduct a commercial assessment of the site. Staff retained Antec Appraisal Group to evaluate the potential interest and viability of the existing Discovery Centre building and the commercial uses against 3 scenarios. One that is an as-is scenario where the existing size of the building would be retained versus other 2 scenarios which assumed redevelopment of the site up to 4 stories in either residential or a mixed-use commercial or mixed-use residential scenarios. In summary, the assessment demonstrates that in the short and medium term, the Discovery Centre facility should be retained, as the cost of redevelopment for the other 2 scenarios outweigh most, if not all, of the expected economic rent or return of those proposed uses. Maintaining the current facility and maximizing its use is seen as a viable proposition, which would include leasing the property to Waterfront Shores Corporation and or find appropriate use for existing buildings such as library, cafe, restaurant. Maintaining the Discovery Centre building in public ownership allows the city to preserve control of this prime waterfront asset over its economic life and enables strategic review of this asset as community needs evolve. So on this slide, it illustrates all the elements that I just described that served as inputs into developing the preliminary option. All the inputs in the green bracket, when considered comprehensively, have shaped staff's rationale for recommending this option and now bringing forward to committee and council for decision. Through the range of consultation, not only did we receive feedback about the option or potential use for the site, but also, as I mentioned before, about what were some of the strategic considerations about making decisions about the site. So this feedback has been used to create a list of directions for future use as outlined in Appendix F. So to be applied in the development of this option, those would also be, could be referred to. These directions include factors such as ensuring that public access is retained along the waterfront, viable capital and operating funding model. It will be a place with a vibrant community interaction, with a high degree of animation, serving as a community hub, provides opportunity for Indigenous community gathering space, is a space that can evolve with the community, and achieves a high degree of design excellence and sustainability reflective of the importance of this site. So the report recommends that HPL refer to these directions as they work to move this preliminary option towards the proposed concept. So now shifting gears here from how we built up this preliminary option, on the right-hand side of the screen, it's showing how staff are proposing that it be moved forward to further develop, refine, and test the concept. It's really at this stage that staff are recommending that the work shift from a city-led project to a Hamilton Public Library-led project, and that the library be authorized to lead the process to develop the proposed concept for committee and council approval. The items in the red bracket on the right of the slide are the proposed work packages, and it's really made up of these 5 elements. So Hamilton Public Library Program Design and Development Study, then a facility and space needs assessment, HPL-led project work, Indigenous community collaboration, and public and stakeholder consultation. The output of these work plan items will enable the library to solidify the proposed concept and enable city staff to bring forward for a future council decision a refined vision for the building, HPL's operating model and of the facility, high-level capital and operating estimates to implement the vision, and outline further processes and work required to implement the vision. This slide lists the work packages that I just described again on the left, along against a schedule, as well as key deliverables. The work plan schedule requires HPL to deliver the proposed concept to the city in Q1 2025 for city staff's assessment. And then following this, the staff within the Municipal Land Development Office will bring forward a recommendation report with the proposed concept in Q2 2025 for committee and council decision. Progress updates will also be delivered along the way to keep committee and council, as well as the community, apprised of this undertaking in Q4 2023 in Q3 2024. As the library leads the work to develop the proposed concept, there's also the opportunity for Waterfront Shores and the library to work together in providing temporary pop-up exhibit programs in the Discovery Centre. This temporary program would assist the library in piloting exhibits and support the development of the longer-term program design and exhibit gallery space. This interim initiative would occur for the duration that Waterfront Shore leases the building as a temporary sales centre and as the library completes its work plan for establishing the future vision. In summary, this staff report recommends, and just paraphrasing the recommendations of the staff report, is that the library be identified as the city's partner and authorized to lead the work ahead to test and refine the preliminary option as part of developing the proposed option, the proposed concept for the Discovery Centre for future decision, that the core pieces of the concept be centered around redesigning the facilities to incorporate a library services area, Indigenous community gathering space, exhibits and gallery space, cafe, and visitor amenities, and that this proposed concept be developed aligning to the strategic directions outlined in Appendix F of the report, and that the work proceed in accordance with the work plan and timeline outlined in Appendix E. So thank you. That concludes my overview, and I'll now turn it over to Paul Takala to expand on the library's vision and the proposed approach to the work ahead.
Please go ahead, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today to talk about our vision for the Discovery Centre. We're just calling up a presentation. If you give us one moment. Okay, if you can go to the second one. So I thought I'd begin by just talking a bit about the context of the Hamilton Public Library right now and what's behind this. And I think the first thing I'd like to say is I think these last few years of the pandemic have been challenging times for people. And I think some of the discord that exists in the community prior to COVID, it was there prior, but it's become more pronounced, and we certainly feel it. Last week, the library, for the last 20 years, we've had our mission statement has been freedom to discover. Last week, the library board updated it for the first time since amalgamation to be freedom to belong and discover. And I think one of the things that we're very concerned about and what we see is a lack of social cohesion. We've always spent a lot of time thinking about social isolation and trying to make sure that residents are connected to the community and feel connected. I think when we talk about social cohesion, there's a couple elements to that. One is that people feel connected to their community, but also the different communities that make up our city are actually have some kind of common terms of relationship with each other. And I think what we've seen is a lot more division and polarization and anger. And so for us, coming out of COVID, in the last 2 years, we've been working on our strategic plan. The board looked at like the next 10 years, and that quote kind of sums up, although much about what's going to happen in the next 10 years, we're really not sure, but working with others to find ways that we can create civic renewal. It really needs to be interwoven into all that we do. And whether that's delivering library services or working in partnership, we really need to focus on civic renewal and creating more social cohesion. I think it's something in maybe growing up in Southern Ontario, we have taken for granted that there's always going to be people that aren't connected with others, but that sort of whole feeling of people belonging to something common, a city, and sharing things and respecting differences needs a lot of work. Part of this is, and for us, there are so many untold stories of Hamilton. And those untold stories, we have our documented history and we have artifacts as well. And trying to uncover those stories is a great opportunity for teaching people, but also for engaging communities involved in so that they can tell their own stories. So we have been expanding and realizing the need for us to expand access to high quality, professional grade exhibits that support education, that connect with people. And we know, I think in local history, and Dermot, we talked about, we've been cherishing or preserving this knowledge for so long, we haven't had enough focus on discovery and engaging people in telling their own stories. So just in terms of where the library is, for the last 20 years and after amalgamation of Wentworth, Dundas, and Hamilton, we've been trying to get all of our facilities on a sustainable footprint. And in fact, right now we're working on Mount Hope, which would be the last library. Certainly that's notwithstanding the need for other libraries in the future, but we've made a lot of progress on that. And one of the things that we've talked about that has been on the list is renovating local history and archives, and to create more space for exhibits and engaging people. What happened was, and I think when the Hamilton Museum Committee was established, we realized, well, let's make sure we understand what the city's doing around a museum before we go ahead and renovate local history and archives. Let's make sure that whatever we do complements and works to support the broader cultural strategy. And so, we were actually, so that caused us to, in a sense, not prioritize what we're going to do for local history and archives, because we wanted to wait to see where that was going to go. And then when the Discovery Center came up as a potential opportunity, certainly for us, an opportunity to work with our Indigenous neighbors, but also any kind of heritage or cultural exhibits that we would create and put at Central, if they're at the Discovery Center, they'd be have a lot more impact, and would be, for residents, for newcomers, for people coming into the city. So we just thought, if we can focus our efforts instead of at Central and local history and archives, at the Discovery Center, we get a lot more impact. So we've articulated a vision that's really around four things, and well, like 3 things plus, in a sense, of food, cafe, and the ability to support events at this space, because it is a great event space that we want to, that should be utilized. So the first is an Indigenous gathering space, and I'll talk about some examples of that, but the ultimate thing here is that's defined, led, and staffed by local Indigenous people. So it's not a library program, it's a local Indigenous program. The heritage exhibits, and I think here we're mindful of commitment to respectful access and preservation, and there's so much opportunity for engagement around heritage and cultural exhibits. And just to give you an example, whenever we put something up on social media, whenever the staff put up something related to local history and archives, it just gets so much, like, there's a connection. People have a natural, and a lot of newcomers coming to Hamilton, or people who have moved here from other places, they're dying to know more about Hamilton's history, as are longtime residents. So and then having a branch library, and I think what's interesting, the idea is having resources for people in the community, the new residents coming to the Harbour, but also the North End, coming into the library, and having access to the resources that they would have, but also these other activities that we'd be opening their eyes to. And I think, like right now, McMaster University, there are discussions with the Museum of Art about trying to renovate their whole entrance to get the McMaster Museum of Art into the entrance of the library, because they realize that's where the students are, that's where the people are. We need to, I actually think heritage exhibits in a vibrant public space is going to have more impact than if it's just heritage exhibits alone. Certainly having this as a showcase for sustainability, and also, and I think this was already touched on, it really aligns with a lot of city strategy. If you could go to the next slide, please. And so I just want to show you a couple pictures of some places. The one on the bottom I haven't seen, on the left I haven't seen. But so in Halifax Public Library, when they redid their central library in 2014, they opened a First Nation Circle is what it's called, and it's this circular space in the library that they designed in conjunction with their local Indigenous community, and it's a place for gathering. It's open to the public, it's open to anyone, and it's kind of open in the library. Adisoke is the Ottawa Public Library, so it's currently under construction. And Libraries and Archives Canada and the Ottawa Public Library are building a new central library, and it's Adisoke is the name, which means storytelling in Anishinaabe Algonquin. And so they've worked with the local community, and the whole building is Indigenous inspired. And that's, in a sense, just an artist rendering of their Indigenous gathering space. Then on the right there, you see Thunderbird House in Edmonton. And I think what's interesting about this is, so you can see the bottom picture there, this is a space within the main new renovated library. And it's separated, and the reason why it's separated is so that they can do smudging and different ceremonies without any special protocols. It's just built into what they do. And the one thing that all these have in common, and certainly Thunderbird House, I think, is one of the really meaningful places to go to, is that it's defined by local stories and by local Indigenous community. So this is not something that, and this is developed right at the beginning. So we're not going to put a Thunderbird House in Hamilton, and I'm not saying the Hamilton Public Library, we don't have the answer to what that Indigenous space would look like, except to say that it's going to be inspired, led, and defined by our local Indigenous communities. And in the case of the Thunderbird, just so for those that are interested, it's from the Plains Cree. And they, for centuries, the Plains Cree people, and they're Indigenous to Edmonton, they lived in harmony with and sustained by the buffalo for thousands of years. And the Thunderbird is a very important deity in their history. And so that's what they decided to shape that around. And it's quite an inspiring place, and people are loving it. And all of these have the concept of, first and foremost, having a place for Indigenous people in the community to experience their ceremonies and their cultures, and hopefully in some cases to reconnect people or connect them for the first time with their history and their stories. Can we go to the next slide? So this is my last slide, and then, second last slide, and we look forward to questions. I just put some things here, and I think Dermot was very articulate about the Hamilton Museum. And I think for us, the thing is, what we're talking about is creating a space that brings together newcomers, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, so we can learn about the richness of both the Indigenous cultures of this area, but also our different histories that have make up. And Canada is a signatory of UNDRIP, and so there we have special responsibilities as a library to make sure that as we're telling those stories, that we're adhering to cultural heritage is done in a way that recognizes the people involved are not having their story told about them, but they're telling their own story. And really what we're trying to do is expand our knowledge and learn about our histories as a way of building mutual understanding. And I think what we see happening, say, south of the border, where people are trying to deny history, we actually need to embrace history and embrace it in its success and achievement, but also embrace history in some of the darker chapters that, we can't have inclusion if we don't recognize what's happened. And so we certainly see our role in animating local history as part of our role as a library about preserving for future generations, and also surfacing diverse stories is part of that. So it's not all about it is celebrating the success of Hamilton, but it's also talking about maybe things we haven't talked about enough. And then, and certainly we believe that justice, human rights, and sustainability are advanced through equitable and respectful access to heritage. And if we could just go to the final slide, and then I'll conclude here. And I just wanted to sort of give an update on what we are hoping to be able to do in advancing and refining the mission. So first of all, the library board, we asked the library board, they have approved up to $250,000 to support feasibility and program studies. And obviously, there is so much consultation that needs to happen, especially around the Indigenous gathering place, but also how we're going to work together with other memory institutions around the heritage exhibits. There's issues around the government's model, making sure that that there's a sustainable long-term governance plan to work with the urban Indigenous community. We're actually, and obviously, we're envisioning that this Discovery Center, which is a beautiful location and a beautiful site, we're anticipating a major capital investment is going to be, identified as part of this process to really bring the building to up to what it could be to support these programs. Now, we are estimating that the feasibility study will cost around $100,000. The reason why we ask for more money is we know there's going to have to be some deep dives and some, we might be running into issues where we need deeper consultations on certain things. We might be examining engineering or facility options that might cost some money. So we have some extra money approved just in case we need it, and we'll keep the board appraised of that. And I think one of the things for us is there's so much consultation that needs on this that we're very mindful of both the library staff and also the Indigenous Relations Office staff in terms of their workload. And so part of the engagement is getting people that the Urban Indigenous Office is comfortable working with to do the heavy lifting around the consultations with us. And so I think we're aware of that. Part of where we're also doing is, I think the heritage exhibits piece of it is something that's central to our plan, whether Discovery Center happens or not. And so I think this is something that we're working on. Currently, we're hiring an exhibit and outreach coordinator that's going to help us. We're going to have to build up the team, but the idea is that we need expertise in that professional curation of material, and we don't have that right now. So we need to nurture that. And so we see the time now moving forward as a time for us to start building up that experience as the consultations and the business plan and all the details happen. It's going to take a lot, it's a lot of work to come up with the actual plan and the capital budget. We are hoping to work with Waterfront Shores in the interim because they're using up part of the space and starting bringing in exhibits there and programs there. So I think that's where we are. And so I think the thing is, there's a lot of conversations that need to happen before I'm sure council can become comfortable with handing over the keys of the Discovery Center. But what we're asking for is, we're not asking, the library board has approved this money. For us, it's about, our relationship with our Indigenous neighbors and trying to create a positive place that can really advance social cohesion in our community, where people can come together, set aside our differences, and learn about where we all come from and what we think. And so that's the vision, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, both of you, for the presentations. And I'll now take it over to the committee members. Are there any questions or discussion? Councillor Spatafora, please.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple questions, and there was two presentations that kind of went on there. My first few questions are in regards to your presentation, Andrea, and maybe Chris will have to jump in as well. So Parks Canada is still in the building. When is their lease up? When are they leaving? What do they pay, et cetera? Can we get a bit of a review on the Parks Canada Chair, please?
Through you, Madam Chair, Madam Mayor. I'm not sure, sorry, maybe I'll ask Dave from real estate. There's elements here that I'm not sure that we can necessarily state in open
in
session.
public, that's right.
Because we are talking about a lease. So why don't I speak in generalities at first to the heart of your question and see. We inherited, the city of Hamilton inherited the lease from of Parks Canada once the facility was given to the city. So that lease is a long-term lease with Parks Canada, and that was part of the dissolution of the building to the city.
If you
Your other-
want some further details, we can go into camera later on.
So, big picture, we see that the Parks Canada staff, as far as their lease today, are there for the long term.
Councillor Spatafor?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that answer. When do we see the lease ending for Waterfront Shores? Is there an end date on the lease?
Well, you know what,
Or is that-
on the lease matters, how about we take those into camera if you want the details, or online? Again, I think it's putting you, staff in a bit of an awkward situation.
Yeah, I have no issue with that. I don't mean to.
No, I
to
know,
do that.
no,
Just-
and you
yeah.
have a right to ask the questions, absolutely. I look to the clerk, is that,
Yes, we can do that. Do you want to go into close now, or do you have other questions to,
I'm sorry, leave it to the end? Okay, leave it to the end.
okay.
Thank you.
Is that okay?
Sure, absolutely.
All right, one other question before I know Councillor Crutch will probably get into a lot more. And Paul, I'll leave it to, Ward 14, just every time I see you, I got to remind you. Question in regards to how this would look down the road. So are we looking at leasing the entire building to the public library, or how does that look? Are they going to take control and work with all their consultants and in consultation with all the other groups about how they're going to lay out the entire Discovery Center, or is it just the piece that they're going to be involved in, or is it the entire piece? If that's making any sense, through you, Chair.
Thank you.
Through the chair to Councillor Spatafora, ultimately, if that, essentially the library is preparing a business case. We can call this generally a business case. Coming forward, when all the details are sorted out, then, and if the proposed concept was approved by council, then Paul had used the term getting the keys, that would be part of a facility agreement. So it's really through this upfront work that the library will be doing, scouring the space, like basically doing a space needs assessment, at the same time of looking at what does a program look like and how does a program fit in the space, and sort of trying to, it's like a test fit analysis about how do they implement their vision within the space that's there, what maybe modifications would be required. And then working with the city's facility team, there would be a facilities and corporate real estate, a facility agreement for the space that they're requesting.
Councillor Spatafor?
Thank you. And so just to confirm, we wouldn't know right now if it's going to be for the entire space, a portion of space. That'll all come out through the, when we do the studies, or the public library does the studies?
Sure, go ahead,
Sure.
Paul.
No, I think that's a great question. And so the thing is, I think, like, our assumption right now is that we're defining a business plan for the whole place. However, like with other libraries, the city still owns the building. Basically, we're holding it in trust on behalf of the Hamilton Public Library does to provide service to the residents. So the city would still own the building, but we'd have a long-term arrangement. Having said that, and I think this is a conversation that needs to happen if the Indigenous gathering place. So right now we're in shared facilities, and whether this is a shared facility that there would be, a program, just like we have, say, IT in the central library, they're still part of the city. and that's worked through facilities arrangements. But we haven't had conversations about that yet, and I think that's just one of the pieces, what is the relationship to that? But there's ways of resolving it, but I think it's too, that would need to be explored during our detailed conversations, exactly what that governance relationship looks like. And we're hoping for a very close partnership, but we also need to build in mechanisms so that there's a long-term, basically respecting the autonomy of, the different partners that are involved.
Thanks. Councillor Spatafora?
And thanks, Chair. And again, for me, similar to the first comment on the first, I think as long as the focus and the collaboration with the Indigenous communities are there, that's my main focus right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Crutch?
Yeah, I have a fair number of questions and comments. First, I just want to say that I'm mindful of a few things, that this is exciting. I've been at many of the conversations that we had around the Discovery Centre that were in person, held out at the Discovery Centre, other locations, including in the former spaces on James Street. This has been a long conversation about the Discovery Centre. I'm also mindful of the fact that, I've also very closely watched what happened with the Barton Tiffany lands. And I'll be very frank, not in love with that process in terms of watching us have a sort of straw poll in a neighborhood meeting, to watching us sole source the project, to seeing how it's evolved. Ultimately, the film studio is going to be a good thing. That's not my point. The point is the process really always left me feeling, And so I want to say, too, to the folks who came here with the museum, didn't have a chance to review this in advance. I didn't know you were coming today, but happened to have lived in Kitchener-Waterloo, London, St. Catharines, and Guelph, all the places where these civic museum examples are. So I'm coming to this conversation with a very specific insight into what I'm talking about. Hopefully that's coming through. What I hear you saying, I think, is that this is a very material moment. And again, in observing other processes, this moment is the material moment where we say, okay, if we go down this preliminary path, of course there's an option for council to say no later on. But past this point, that becomes, frankly, rude and difficult. If we go to the library and say, would you like to spend $100,000 to do an assessment, and then we come back and say, well, cute assessment, we're not really interested. That's just not how these things go in my experience. So I want to confirm that that's where we're at in the process. We're at a point in the process where we're looking to form a partnership, and we're looking for the partner to lead. Is that right?
Go ahead, Ms. Smith.
Through the chair, to Councillor Crutch, yes, that is correct. This is a baton handing moment from the city to the library to conduct further work, to test and refine, to basically validate is the process ahead.
Councillor Crutch? Oh, sorry, Mr. Takala.
Through you, Chair. Just to add, I think from our perspective, and it's a great question, we need to develop a business plan that would, and there's going to be, so we see it, we're hoping it's going to go forward. I think we more see this, and why we got the library board, library board's very supportive of this program, was that we wanted to come to committee to make sure we at least have a permission, support in principle. I think that's how we see it. Yeah. And I don't think you don't go down this path unless you have a reasonable confidence that we are going to be able to come up with a highly valuable program. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here trying to make the case. Having said that, I think for us, it's trying to come to terms with our history and working with our Indigenous partners is something that we've been getting it wrong for 200 years, and so as a public library, we've seen what others have done, and we want to move forward in a different way. And so I guess I'm not seeing this as the final approval. We're going to be ambitious and come back with a program that's going to cost money. We're going to have to have money for that.
Of course, yeah.
So I think that this is a wonderful building, but I wouldn't see this as a point of no return. And I think, many times when we get involved in partnerships, oftentimes the question is, what's success? Success is you complete the project. For me, and I think for the Hamilton Public Library, success is we advance the relationship and we make progress. And if sometimes the path that leads you down isn't successful, if the relationship is still built that we can work together in the future, then that's okay. That's another form of success. Not as good as actually succeeding at what you want to do, but I just want to make it clear that that's where we're coming from. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I
Councillor
appreciate that openness. And through the chair, I mean, as somebody who, I love public libraries. I mean, when I go on vacation, I go to public libraries. I sound boring, but I find them exciting. One of the very first things I did was go and look at the Hamilton's collections of Civic Museum's collection and spent time there. So these things are all really important. But what I'm not hearing, and the thing I think I'm concerned about and why I don't think I'll eventually support this, is because I want to see that first and foremost having a place for Indigenous people to lead this work. In my mind, again, just being frank, there's a real setup situation here in terms of we have the Waterfront Shores folks who are going to be leasing this building for 5 years. I don't think that's great. Then we have Parks Canada folks in there. And if I look at the map that was provided as part of the presentation, which I think was slide 3, right? You see a section here where eventually this may be a library asset, a museum asset, a space for Indigenous folks. But it's carved up in such a way, from my perspective, that I would have liked to have seen this building just be turned over to the Indigenous community. I'm really struck by our history around water here and the hugely concerted effort of Indigenous folks to reclaim that space in terms of water walks, to have conversations about that, to lead them, and the very deeply colonial history we have from the 19th century going forward in Hamilton, where we basically employed people to go out there and tell Indigenous people they couldn't have access to the water. So like the water is a central spot. There are just not that many spaces left on the waterfront in terms of planning where there are buildings, like assets like this. And I appreciate what's happening with Macassa, but there just aren't. This is an asset that could be turned over as a water center for Indigenous folks. They could lead the process. Others could come along with them. The reason I say it that way is because I'm mindful of this idea that it's the opportunity paradox, right? I'll call it that. If I said to you, well, would you like to be part of this thing? The library's going to do it. We're going to partner with the library. It's kind of the question I put to the museum folks. And they answered that question in a positive way by saying, yeah, we think this is a great opportunity to partner with the library. Having a building on our own might cause other kinds of problems. That partnership is good. But I wonder, once this consultation is done, if you went out to the Indigenous community and said, okay, here are your 2 options, right? Option number 1 is, we're going to give this over to you as a form of land back. We're going to give you this building. We're going to give you access to this building. You can do what you want with this building. And then you can create partnerships in the community. Would those partnerships look the same as if the library was leading this? And the answer, I think, fundamentally is probably no, but maybe, but we haven't done that consultation. So for me, it's like we're taking a big leap forward in terms of baton holding, but then haven't done some of the major consultation. I'm also really worried about hearing things like, twice now I've heard it in this meeting, well, the Office of Urban Indigenous Relations doesn't have the capacity to do these things. Well, then I guess this is an opportunity for us to build capacity so that they can lead. Like, that's my core concern, right, is that we want to have these projects be led by Indigenous folks, period. And so once they're done through these other lenses, other mechanisms, I've just seen it over time, many times, right? It just doesn't end up coming together in these ways because they're not led by those folks. So I want to ask you in terms of, I guess some of the questions I have are frankly the same questions that Councillor Spadafora had about the different leasehold arrangements to understand the different timings that are going on here. I'm also really mindful of the fact that the Hamilton Waterfront Trust is going through a huge change, and there are a number of lease, gymnastics going on over there with that, right? I mean, we had the lease, as the chair of the Waterfront Trust, I can confidently say, there was a lease when we sold the rights to the lease to the city and so on and so forth, and there are lease payments that may be due and all kinds of stuff. And so all that's on top of what's happening here. My only question now, I think I want to ask in public and maybe more in private session, is just about the Waterfront Shores lease. I think that's a major stumbling block here in terms of urgency of this, right? I understand that no matter what happens, whether it's you that does it, somebody else that leads this work, anyone who leads the study of what to do with this space, it's going to take them 5 minutes to do it. Like, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a while, right? So But can we ask Waterfront Shores if they would leave after that? Because, I mean, having them there for 5 years, right, occupying this space is not us urgently dealing with anything. That's us saying, well, we found a use for the space for Waterfront Shores, and they may be willing to do some co-sponsored project. That's great, pop-ups or whatever, but like, is there the potential to ask them that question? I know they've done some leasehold improvements. Just asking if we've had a conversation with them about this at all, about them leaving earlier, or do we have to have that conversation in
I
closed
think
session?
that, respectfully, I think that we need to have that conversation in
Okay.
closed session.
Great.
Yep.
We can have it then. Let me just make sure I haven't forgotten anything else. No, the rest of the things I really want to ask, I think, are things I'm not allowed to ask. I just want to leave with one final comment. I understand what you said earlier about social cohesion, and so like, you know, just in my education, I read a book by Benedict Anderson about imagined communities from the 80s, and talks about this idea of nation building, right? So I'm very conscious of this idea that we talk about a common space, a common understanding, social cohesion, imagined communities. This is all about nation building, and so who's the nation that's doing the building here, right? Is it us, or is it Hamiltonians? How are we letting Indigenous nations do that? So that, I think there's another complicated problem layered in there, so I'm just going to leave you with that, and I'll save the rest of my questions for the in-camera session. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much. I don't know if there are any other further questions. Okay, so that at this time then, can I have the mover and seconder to receive the presentation? And then we'll go into camera. Moved by Councillor Spatafora, seconded by Councillor Gretsch. Thanks very much. Can we please have the vote up?
See, math is pretty funny, right?
It's very funny.
Math is great.
That carries 3-0. Thanks very much. Let's see. So now I'm going to ask for a mover and seconder to move into closed session respecting item 14.2 pursuant to section 9.3 subsection I of the city's procedural bylaw 21-021 as amended, and section 239.2 subsection I of the Ontario Municipal 2001 Act. I think, did I, both? Okay. As amended, as the subject matter pertains to a trade secret or scientific, technical, commercial, financial, or labor relations information supplied in confidence to the city or local board, which, if disclosed, could reasonably expected to prejudice significantly the competitive position or interfere significantly with the contractual or other negotiations of a person, group of persons, or organization. So can I have that mover and seconder? Moved by Councillor Spatafora, seconded by Councillor Gretsch. Can we have the vote on that, please? That carries 3-0. Thanks very much. Members of the public, the meeting will be continued. The meeting will continue following the closed session portion of the meeting when you see the members of the committee rejoin the meeting. The committee will wait up to 5 minutes upon reconvening in open session before proceeding with the meeting to provide members of the public and the media time to return. Before we move into closed session, I want to ask all members of the public to please exit the room and the WebEx meeting now. It looks like that's already been done as I was chatting away here. Thank you very much. And any staff, of course, that are not directly related to this matter are also asked to please exit the meeting now. Thank you so much. Okay, we're back into open session. Thanks, everyone. So we have the revised report in front of us. Can I have a mover and seconder to put it on the floor, please? Moved by Councillor Spadafora, seconded by, I'll second. Can I second it as the chair? I'll second that, just to save you there, Councillor Crutch. So then, is there any discussion on the report that's in front of us? Councillor Crutch, please.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for everyone's patience as we discuss some of the fine details, the leases. Yeah, my position hasn't really changed in terms of my support of this. It's not that I think it can't be supported eventually or at some point. I'd suggest maybe deferring this decision. I really think there needs to be a space and a place to ensure that Indigenous leadership is number one. That's it for me. If I don't see that space and place to do that, and we can't find a way to build capacity to make that happen, to me, it's not a viable goal. Like, we have to have that at the center of what we're doing. It has to be at the center of our relationship with the water, has to be at the center of how we understand these things. And it's frankly what Indigenous people have been saying during the gathering we had at the beginning of this term, in my meetings with them. People have continually said, hey, we need access and we need a place and a space. And so I think having them lead this is the most important part of it for me. I also think that we need to get back to, we need to have one more engagement session at the waterfront. At the beginning of my comments, I talked about the various engagement sessions I attended. And like, these weren't some light, mild engagement session where a couple people came by and looked at some passive pictures. These were like, it was a hot time. Like, people were really going for it. There were lots of questions. There was like, I think 75 or 100 people at one of them. There was several different kinds of iterations of them as we talked about the West Harbour development in general. This was a component of it. Again, some were held at the, I think Evergreen, I think was the space name. And so when we've done all of that, a ton of imagination has gone into this. We spent a lot of, I think, community psychic energy. We need to return back to that place of psychic energy and have an engagement session saying, here's what we're planning on doing, what people think. I also think, it's just these are my 2 cents, that when we spent so much time invested in this, when we thought through so much of this, it's part of for me, an opportunity I hope we can explore going forward is seeing the space without the Waterfront Shores folks in it. I don't think condo sales office is the vision the community ever had for this space. And so whatever we can do to limit that, I think we should explore. So those are the kinds of positions and reasons why I think we ought not to go ahead and do this, because I'm worried of handing a baton off at a baton handing moment and being very deliberate about something and not having done those kind of last 2 pieces of work, which I think are coming back for a final engagement session and really making sure that we have a commitment from the Indigenous community around leadership. Because I do think it's important we talk to the Hamilton, I'm going to get it wrong, the Hamilton Indigenous Advisory Committee, I think that's right. Or I think it's the Hamilton Aboriginal Advisory Committee is how it goes by. I can't remember. Indigenous now, it's changed, okay. So it's great that we had a conversation with them and the consultations are embedded here, but I think we need to go a couple more steps farther to make sure we weave more people into that conversation. And we come away with a way to either have folks lead or build the capacity that apparently I think we may be missing actually at the city. That's what I'm hearing a lot. We're missing the capacity to lead from within on that. And so I don't know what that looks like, but those are my stumbling blocks. I'm not sure if it makes sense to have a motion to that regard. I don't know.
I think we have, I don't know if Councillor Spadafora has anything to add. You can put a motion forward if you wish. I'm going to pass the chair over to Councillor Spadafora though, because I have a few things to say as well.
Go ahead, Mayor.
Thanks very much, Councillor. I certainly hear the flags being raised by my colleagues on the committee. I also believe that in order to build the capacity, we have to start somewhere. And I think this is actually an opportunity to start building that capacity. I think the way that the leadership at the library has already done some of that work. I think the leadership in community in terms of history and in terms of making sure that we have museum space, the work that's been done by the Indigenous Relations Office. These are all things that build capacity for our city, and I think that when if we are serious about, and I believe we are, finding that space and making those relationships work and including everybody's voice, as well as acknowledging the Indigenous leadership that's necessary for this to be a success. I think all of those things build our capacity. And so I do hear the flags and the concerns about we're going too fast. We're going too fast without having enough consultation. I believe that we're ready to move on this, and I support moving ahead with the recommendations from staff. I have to say that even though the baton, as we talked about that earlier, the baton is being passed, there's nothing that prevents this process from being ended if the people who are a part of the process are not happy with it. And I think that a big part of going forward and building community space and building space for moving over and creating the space for Indigenous voices, it has to, this can be a big part, I think, of how we are able to do that going forward. So on that note, I will be supportive of the staff recommendations, with the knowledge that at any time, should there be a concern raised by the people who are leading the Indigenous voices are raised, then we would expect that to come back to committee and council. So thank you all very much for your work and for your presentations. And when the time comes, I'll be supporting the recommendations.
Thank you, and I'll give you the chair back.
Thanks very much. So we are now, did you have a motion, Councillor Crutch, that you wanted to put forward on this?
Yeah, I just don't want to be unkind to the clerk, so could I have a second to quickly type it and send it?
Sure.
Yeah, I do. Just want to maybe add a G to the end there. So that's, I'm not supporting that we'd saying we turned the recommendation down, but I'm saying I think we need 2 more steps. So I'm just going to try and quickly write those into a sentence.
Okay.
I type fast.
You type fast? Okay. We'll just, if folks don't mind, just holding on a little bit, because if we can get something that works all the way around, it would be better than not. So let's see what we can have in terms of a possible amendment from Councillor Crutch, and see if we can't move forward in that way. So we'll just, I'm trying to like stretch now, right? It's called stretching. But I do appreciate the conversation. I think we had a really great discussion today, and there's no doubt that these kinds of processes can take some time, and certainly knowing that there's a significant amount of time to build the the foundation of what could be a really great engagement process. I think the engagement process is just beginning. It's definitely not over. So on that note, I'm going to stop talking because, I could say something that I'll regret.
I have a clarification. I've sent it to you. It'll take a second. But I just wanted to ask maybe one thing I think that we do sometimes in these conversations, and it's a question for Shelley. I hope you don't mind, Shelley. We do in these conversations is we talk about the Indigenous community very monolithically, and so my motion proposes that the Indigenous community lead that, but that's a very monolithic thing to say. So is there maybe a better way I could word that, or do you think that's sufficient in terms of letting people figure that out for themselves, or what do you think? Should it be co-located inside the urban Indigenous strategy in some meaningful way, or the relations office, or do you think community is sufficiently a fine way to put it?
Through the chair, Shelley Hill, Manager of Indigenous Relations. I think definitely co-leading this work and working towards further engagement to see, to help sort of, how would I say, just to help further bring to light the next steps and the way that it should look through the community, through our Indigenous community, and just to help revisit the plan and to see if there's anything further that they would like to add to this, to include to this. So.
Okay, so I think the way I put it with Indigenous community is okay, but could I say in consultation with the Urban Indigenous Relations Office?
Yes.
That would be the thing I'm missing at the end. in consultation with the Urban Indigenous Relations Office.
Just say,
Sorry, go ahead,
Indigenous
please.
Relations Office.
Thank you.
Apparently I can't type.
So that's my suggestion, is that we have a final public engagement session at the Discovery Center. Doesn't have to be there, I just had proposed that because it seems like a smart thing to do, to talk about the Discovery Center at the Discovery Center. And then the second one being, and I'm happy for minor modifications if these things pose a big hurdle. Oh, Jason, sorry.
GM Thorne?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, I just want to make sure staff were clear on the directions. I'm a little bit concerned that H identifies the recommendation currently says that the public library would be taking the lead, and H also says, so I just want to make sure there's not conflicts within the recommendation. And same with G, I'm just not sure if we're approving A through F, which provides fairly clear direction as to the next steps, what we would do with the feedback through G, unless it is the feedback would inform the public library as they develop the next phases of work. So just looking for a little bit of clarity. I just want to make sure that we don't have conflicting directions within the overall direction.
So thanks for that. I see what your point is, and I guess I would ask the mover to clarify on the issues that were raised by staff. So I guess, and perhaps as chair, I can ask for specific type of clarification, which is the Hamilton, on C, the Hamilton Public Library be authorized to lead the work plan process, versus H, which was up there a second ago and is now gone.
So I'm just consolidating so that you can see it all at the same time.
Okay, so there's that piece, which you can't have two organizations leading. And my sense of our kind of work that we need to do as a committee and as a council is to provide direction that we can achieve the goals of the vision for the center. And I guess I'm not sure
I think I can
if
solve
we
this.
can address that. So if you wanted to talk about that anomaly first, Councillor Kretsch?
So I maybe just procedurally not making a few mistakes here, and perhaps you can help me. What I'm trying to get us to do is to not consider this until we consider two things first. So what I'm trying to do is say, A, we consider having another public engagement session, and hearing what both you said and what Shelley had said was that we do a consultation, a wider consultation through the through the Indigenous Relations Office, and then come back with those two pieces before we consider A through F.
So you want to refer, is what you want to do? Defer.
See, this is why I need help. Thank you. So defer, and then those two things. So I could slightly wordsmith the second one to say, we want to do the consultation and come back with that consultation. So we give a chance for the Indigenous Relations Office to do a bit more consultation and come back with that piece. And we have a public engagement session at the Discovery Center and come back with that piece. And then we consider this in light of those two things. And I'm sorry that I didn't get that quite right, but I needed a bit of information from the closed session in order to formulate my thoughts. And so I apologize that it's not coming forward sooner, but I didn't have the information I needed. I thought magically the closed session would tell me so much more, but alas.
Deferrals can be debated, right?
In this case,
Yes. Okay.
The reason for the deferral, yes.
So can you then, if you don't mind, Councillor Kretsch, that this project be led by, you didn't say that just now, you said that there
it'd
be a
have to be changed.
consultation.
Yeah, so that the Indigenous Relations Office consult with the Indigenous community, and report back. That seems to be fine. I'll say it again, that the Indigenous Relations Office consult with the Indigenous community and report back.
So, sorry, you want the,
So take off the, just say that take off that this consultation be led by and in partnership with, and so that it says that the Indigenous community, that the Indigenous Relations Office consult with the Indigenous community and report back. No, so the Indigenous Relations Office consult with the Indigenous community and report back.
Following the public engagement session?
Before we go back to this report.
Okay.
So I guess, so that's clear then? These are, okay. Do you have any questions, Councillor Spadafora? Okay, can I pass the chair over to you then?
Go ahead, Mayor.
Thank you. I just, because we have Shelley Hill from the Indigenous Relations Office here, actually both of the Indigenous Relations Office staff, two of, are here. Is this enough direction for you to, through you, Chair? Is this enough direction for them to come back with something that would inform this process?
Shelley, go ahead.
Through the chair. Could we not have C first before the final public engagement session, and then go into, a public engagement? And just to clarify, the Indigenous Relations Office is only for consultation with the Indigenous community. We're not responsible for the full-on public engagement, right?
Say again?
Just clarification.
Say again, I'm sorry.
The clarification would be that the Indigenous Relations Office would consult with the Indigenous community, but would not lead the final public engagement session.
Yeah, yeah. But if I can, through you, Chair, just to confirm that that's something that is a piece of work that's doable? And then can I then further ask, through you, Chair, to Chris Phillips, what does a delay in the time, is there any issue of consideration in terms of a delay of the timelines to achieve these two pieces?
Manager Phillips.
Through you, Deputy Chair, Vice Chair, I guess. No, I don't think, it doesn't change the timelines. I mean, it certainly changes the timelines on the HPL's work if they were to get going. The only clarity I'd maybe on the wordsmithing there, final public engagement session, just mean a public engagement session, and the only and I guess it's just about the scope. I'm assuming the scope of that then rests with staff. Is that? I'll just ask any of my colleagues if they've, Madam Mayor, if they have any comments.
Yes, sure, please, Mr. Tekala.
Yeah, Paul, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, just to answer your question, from my perspective, and I think we've talked about this with the board, that the most important thing here is we're trying to do something that brings people together. And we're also going to need to have strong consensus if we're going to be able to get the support for the vision at the Discovery Center. So I think this, it will delay some things in terms, but I don't think, like, the work we're doing around heritage exhibits and different things, that's going to proceed separate from the Discovery Center. So I think it would be good if we got clarity before moving forward. I think, for us, when we say the Hamilton Public Library, and so I'm not disagreeing with this, but I'm just, when I talk to my other library colleagues around the country, in a sense, what that means is not that, like, the Indigenous gathering place, that is their place, and we're not, it's theirs, and they need to design and make the decisions around how it's programmed and who programs it. And I think when we say we want to take, it's almost like we need to hold that trust relationship with the Indigenous community. It doesn't mean we now tell the Indigenous community what they want, et cetera. So that's built into what we do. So some of the consultations, but I think, we stand ready to work with our colleagues at the Urban Indigenous Relations Office. If that's enough clarity for, thank you.
Thank you, Chief Librarian Takala. Just one question, Clerk. Do we need a timeline on this deferral?
That would be wonderful.
Yeah, I would want that too. I have one more question,
Yeah,
actually.
go ahead, Mayor.
What I'm wondering is, it seems to me that the challenge is not so much, I understand the need for the desire for another public meeting for the community writ large. But I guess I'm trying to get a sense of, like, the way that the report recommendations read are that back to item C of the original report, that the Hamilton Public Library be authorized to lead the work plan process detailed in Appendix E to develop the proposed concept. And I think what we need to do is simply amend C to say, with the Indigenous community leading the Indigenous community space. I mean, it just seems to me that that's what we're doing here. So we're either having a library and a museum and Indigenous community space, or we're not, or we're doing something completely different. And I guess to the mover through you, I just need to seek that clarification.
Councillor Crutch?
Yeah, so I'm not saying that, no. I think it's really important to take this extra step of doing the public engagement session at the Discovery Center.
Yeah.
And then to your point, like going to the broader Indigenous community, having a conversation about what they see here, right? If the folks come back and say, yeah, this seems like this makes sense. This composition works for us. We're happy to do the thing with the library, whatever it might be, right? Great. If they come back with a different recommendation, I think we have to consider that. I think it's important to consider that as part of this, at a minimum. I think they're just that the proposal right now seeks to do some of that consultation a little bit later, which is totally also a thing. But I think we should do the consultation up front. Is all I'm trying to do. I'm trying to move the consultation piece a little bit forward here. I think our next meeting of the the West Harbour subcommittee is September. So I think it's doable by then, is my understanding.
Okay, I appreciate that clarification. Thanks through you, Chair. I guess at the end of the day, whatever we get from the consultations will inform the next iteration of the report and any amendments that might be needed at that point in terms of specifics we can undertake. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Chair.
Perfect. You want the chair back? I know timeline, I think, was the last thing we discussed on this motion. So I'll pass that over to you.
Actually, did you have a motion on the timeline?
I do not have a motion on the timeline.
September, you said, to Councillor Crutch?
I think our next meeting is September 11th. Is that right? Yeah, it is.
Okay, so in time for our September
Sorry,
11th.
just go ahead, Manager Phillips, just 1 second here.
Sorry, through Vice Chair. So we're at a bit of a disadvantage here on timeline. I think part of it is Shelley's work at identifying who is the Indigenous community members and their timelines themselves. And then the second piece is obviously number 2 doesn't happen until after Shelley. I would argue that September is way too optimistic, I think, to some degree, to then get you feedback in a form for you to report back on? I mean, I don't, GM Thorne maybe
GM Thorne?
has a different thinking, but we just had a community consultation as an example the other night on other issues. I mean, the ability to dissect this information and thus the reason why the work plan as constituted in here was actually a 5-year work plan, right?
GM Thorne.
Through the chair, if you give us in the motion no later than the November meeting, we'll still shoot for the September, but it gives us a bit of breathing room. So it'd be no later than November, but we'll still shoot for September.
Okay. That's fine with me.
Shelley, is that good with your, it's good? Councillor Crutch? So clerk, it'll read that the November meeting would be.
In case the November meeting gets
Very smart. Right, very smart.
Any other, Mayor, any other comments? Okay, I'll pass the chair back to you then.
Thanks so much, I appreciate that. Okay, so then we have before us, the motion is that the report be referred to allow that the Indigenous Relations Office consult with the Indigenous community on the project, and two, that there be a public engagement session, preferably at the Discovery Center, and that feedback be incorporated into in the recommendation report. The staff report back to West Harbour Committee on the above no later than the end of 2023. That's before us, moved by Councillor Crutch, seconded by, by me? I didn't want to delay this too much, but I guess that's where we are when we want to get a good process. So I'll second it then. And all those in favor?
Bear with me for 1 moment. So just earlier, we described this as an amendment. It is no longer an amendment to that
No,
report.
it's not an amendment.
Making sure everyone's clear.
It's a deferral.
Yeah. This is for the-
That carries 3-0. Thanks very much. I don't see any further business on the agenda of this committee. So I would then ask for a mover and a seconder to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Spatafora, seconded by Councillor Crutch.
Who else?
Oh, it's defeated.
That's carried 3-0. Thanks very much, everyone. It's a lot of good work. Really appreciate it. Thank you.